Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about a very important topic that's really dear to our hearts.
Therapist burnout.
They just published this article. This is the new wave of the pandemic. Therapist burnout. This is something new and different. Or is it?
I think we've been talking about burnout for a long time. We came out with our burnout handbook in 2019, pre-pandemic life. And we came out with it because we've been seeing it ever since we've been coaching. I mean, to be honest, that's the whole reason I went into private practice, as I was burned out at my county job. And what we see is kind of what I experienced too. You are burnt out in these other fields of work or other lines of work, and then you start a business and you think that that's going to save you or rescue you from that burnout, but it really just, you transmit the burnout into that business, and it can continue once the excitement and the endorphins wane from doing something new, right?
Yeah. It's such a powerful piece that we don't really talk about a ton. And yet the first time that I experienced burnout was in graduate school. Like before I'd even gotten through the program, I was having symptoms of burnout. My colleague or my classmate in graduate school, she did her whole study on burnout in graduate students. So we're like setting people up for this experience, but we're not, for the most part, really talking about it and talking about how, like, giving it a word, right? And really giving it a phrase. It's sort of like, oh, I'm so burnt out. And I feel like there's like a minimization that happens and a normalization that if you feel disconnected from your work, if you feel angry, if you feel sad, if you feel irritated at your clients, if you're falling asleep in session, if you're depressed, this is just the cost of doing business, or this is just the cost of being a part of this profession. And that's just, I don't think that has to be true.
But we come from systems that set us up for that in a lot of ways. So for you in school, I mean, I know I worked 2 jobs and did full-time grad school. And then I actually got my first like full-time pre-licensed job before I had even finished classes. So I went to my professors. I'm like, can I take my exams early? Because I oh my goodness. And so there's this sort of like, there was this kind of scarcity stuff that was happening. So I had to do everything I could. Then you have all these hours you have to meet in systems that are either underfunded or they're overburdened in terms of like amount of services they need to provide and what they really can.
Yeah, I think that plays for me as a driven person, having this, here's the amount of hours that you need to get. You need to have these 3,000 hours. And at that time, they didn't have a limit they had sort of a limit, but it wasn't super clear about what you could do pre-licensed. And I had a 32-hour-a-week job, and I was really thankful that job was one that gathered me hours. And then on top of that, I was going to grad school full time. And they told me, oh, this program is a 2-year program, but it's going to take you 3, which of course, being a driven person, I was like, no, it's not. I'm not going to do that. But I remember the first moment when I finished with a session with a client, and I was like, just stirred up. And I went out, and I didn't normally do this. We had our counseling program was one program inside of the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Center. And I went into another program, which is not something I would normally do. And I just started kind of complaining. And I can't think of the word. That's not the word I'm not supposed to say right now, but just complaining. And I was like, as I was like complaining about this session and this client and how difficult they were, there was this second thing that was happening in the back of my head. I was like watching myself going, this isn't like you. What's going on? Why is this session activating you this much? This yeah, you have hard clients all the time. Why is this so different? And I remember having this like light bulb moment of, oh my gosh, you're burnout. This is what burnout feels like. And I went up into my boss's office and I said, oh my gosh, I'm like, here's the experience that I just had. I'm experiencing burnout. And she said, oh my goodness, this isn't okay. You're like, I'm so glad you came to me. What do you need? Cancel your clients for the rest of the week. Take some time off. Do whatever you need to do. Journaling, how can we support you? My experience is an anomaly.
Yeah, that's not, I don't think most people are like, take some time off. They're like, oh, sorry, so-and-so called out, so you got 10 extra cases. Mm-hmm. It's more like, well, I'm sorry that's happening, and we're all stressed out. The experience for me was, we're all stressed out here, and this is what it is. Yeah. And so you're not alone because your supervisor's stressed out, and their supervisor, and it just like comes down the line. To the frontline people. It's nothing new.
It's nothing new. And because there was a certain level of burnout through our profession, that like a pretty high level of burnout through our profession before the pandemic happened, now we have this additional layer, right? It's not that, oh my goodness, this is another wave. It's like we had our own burnout. I don't want to say pandemic, but like we had our own like huge issue with burnout. And now we layered on a pandemic on top of that.
Just magnified what's already there. And maybe like we talk about it being like the Instapot. It like pressure cooks some of the things to more of a forefront where people are being more vocal, which I think is good. Yeah. I think, like I said, coming from a system that's like, hey, we're all burned out and that's the way it is. And that's like the status quo. And now we're saying, I can't keep this status quo anymore. Mm-hmm. That's the positive of it, that at least now it's becoming more of a norm to talk about. You're seeing it more like in news, like you said with the Forbes article. None of us are surprised, but I'm sure the rest of the world is like, oh, therapists are struggling.
Yeah, I think, and they're going, oh yeah, I guess like for a lot of therapists, we've gone into old patterns. Suddenly our boundaries may be very blurry between home and work if we've moved to virtual work and we're taking on more people. And sometimes because we say, well, it's a recession and people are struggling, so I'm going to slide my rate all around, which also means while my finances didn't change, my bills didn't change. So now I'm getting less for what the work that I'm doing. Sometimes they're taking on more clients from insurance companies that aren't reimbursing at rates that are really sustainable. So there's this, but there's also this sense of obligation that therapists tend to have of like, people are hurting and I need to be the person to step in and step up, because if I don't do it, nobody else is going to. And then they get to this point where they start falling asleep in session, feeling angry at their client, feeling like totally disconnected. And like, what does that really mean? And so I think we want to talk a little bit about that, of like, what are those signs and symptoms? Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about like specific strategies, but I think sometimes even just identifying what are the signs and symptoms of, am I burnt out or am I heading towards burnout, that I may need to identify in my own life, what might those be? I
think what's poignant about your story in terms of you realizing, like watching yourself and being like, this is not me. I think that's a first clue, first of all, that there is, when we're so far into burnout, I think that's harder to do because we've lost ourselves. But if you're at the beginning of it, it doesn't feel like yourself. Yeah. And so it manifests differently for everybody. And I think we can talk about all those different ways. But I think that that's a good example to say, is it feel aligned with who you truly are? Are you in a space mentally and emotionally that is your norm, your way of being, and where you are most proud and happy to be? And if not, then that's usually...
Yeah, which is interesting, because if I was to look back on myself, I tended to be an overperformer, an overworker.
Right.
I didn't take the time off that I needed to. I didn't, I got breaks if people didn't show up, so it was like, well, I get this many no-shows, so I'll just schedule people through lunch. And if I get a no-show or cancellation, then that's how I get lunch. And then if like everybody, it was like the phases of the moon sometimes where it's like normally we had about a 20% no-show or late cancel rate. And then suddenly you'd get 100% of people showing up. And then you'd be like, oh no. So I can look back and say like, I was setting myself up for burnout the entire time.
So there's like a scope creep.
Yeah, there was. It was really interesting. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that's really interesting as I think back to that time in particular when I was finally first learning about burnout, but again, I didn't always have like the full awareness. I remember that I could start to see people who weren't necessarily therapists, but just people that worked in the agency. We had like a parking lot between all the different offices. So we'd be kind of walking back and forth, kind of like that, seeing people in the hall. And I could tell from the way that somebody walked and the way that they talked that they were getting ready for what I called a self-destruct notice, which was like, we would get these little notes in our thing that said like, this person doesn't work here anymore. And like, please do not share clinical information, and so that wasn't like, oh, they got another job, they decided to move on. It was, oh, something bad happened and this person is no longer an employee. And I remember like, I started to see it and feel it. And I would start to like try to reach out to the person and like chat and be like, hey, like, it's okay to say no. And like, they'll really respect you. And I had the experience at this agency that if I was to set boundaries that like they were respected, and I would try to like encourage them to set boundaries and limits and what have you. You can't, and blah, 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 blah. And they had this story in their mind, and it was, I was catching it too late. And I think that's the other part too, is like, could you, if you were just looking at yourself on video or on a picture, could you see it? Like, I'm thinking about our boot campers and their video journals.
Yeah. So when we do boot camp, we have people like do a journal. They kind of keep it to themselves until they've been in boot camp for a while, but they do their first journal talking about where they're at, what they're struggling with, what they're hoping boot camp will help them with. And then 2 weeks later, we have everyone post their journals looking at that last video journal and reflecting on who they were 2 weeks prior and the transformation. And then usually 9 times out of 10, it's, I didn't realize how tired I was. Oh, I didn't realize how scared I was or overwhelmed. And they don't see it until they actually go look at a video when they're in a little bit of a different space, and we can see it. Yeah. Also, if they ever share those, we're like, okay, that's what we're here for, because, being in private practice, you're probably more of a go-getter, right? Because you want to do your own thing, right? A little entrepreneurial spirit within you. And so you're more likely to burn out because there is no like 9 to 5 per se. And you are the structure. You are the one that creates the system and the culture. And so if it's not working, it's up to you to change it, versus go get another job. But you're more likely to have that kind of burnout. And so if you're leaving something that you're already burnt out in, then you're starting your own business. You might be replicating some of those things. And so some of the ways that we see it show up for people is when I like to think of it in a pendulum. Whenever you're going to extreme in any of those areas of your like wellness, that's a good red flag. So physically, you're like overdoing it because you're controlling, you want to control something, or you're not even addressing your physical well-being. Or emotionally, you're feeling intense feelings about clients. Feeling defensive is a really good red flag for me. I feel defensive or kind of resentful. Or when you're totally numbed out.
Yeah.
And what other areas you think too? environmentally when you're not taking care of things and things are starting to pile up, or that you're super controlling of your environment and like out of anxiety and frustration and like trying to control something.
Yeah, like I could always tell based on like what my car looked like, right? Like,
there you go.
Like I'm a messy, and there's we go over this in boot camp, this like red light, yellow light, green light.
Yes.
Of like, true. Okay, what does like green light look like in terms of like my life and my business? And I got this from a trauma training like years ago. And I actually found the CE certificate, and it was through cross country, but it didn't actually show who the presenter was on it. So I was like, oh man,
we would give credit if we
I've
could
been
to
wanting
you.
to give credit to this person. I cannot find her. But red light, yellow light, green light. And she gave this great example of like green light, you know, she's got a chair in the corner of her bedroom and the chair is like completely clear. Yellow light, there's like a few things that need to be like put away and hung up. And then like red light is like the chair is like completely like covered. And I think that shows up in terms of our to-do lists, our calendars, our project management, you know, the clutter around our house sometimes.
For me, it would be like my green light, the chair would be clean, and then the yellow light, it would be like deep cleaned, and then the red light would be it's reupholstered and the whole room has been rearranged. I'm just saying.
No, that's the piece, right?
You gotta know
like determining what life looks like for you, and in that process. So, yeah, I think it's just such a powerful conversation. If you are noting that some of these things kind of hit, you are not alone, and it's very normal. And we're gonna be talking about a little bit more strategies. We have a burnout handbook totally free that you can kind of download to start going into this. But we're also going to be doing a live event. And this is a live event we've done a couple of times, and the response that we get from therapists is just amazing in terms of how this helps reinvigorate them, reconnect them, helps them get clarity on where they need to put some attention, where they need to put some boundaries, where they need to attract more of what they need to feel really good about their business. So you are invited to come to that. It's got 3 CEs, 3 CE eligible for APA and MBCC. And you can find all of this at zinnyme.com/free, or of course the show notes. But I know if you're like listening in the car, just go to our website, click on free trainings, and you'll be able to access it. Or of course, if you're listening to this in the podcast, and you can click on the show notes, we have it there too. But you're invited. We want to help support you. You matter, and your clients need you to be at that high function.
You
right?
need you to be at that. Like, this life is short, and we need to enjoy it and seize the goodness of it. And if our like focus is really on, it's not about like, oh, go take your bubble bath and write in your journal, and those are all good things, but we also are looking at what is the context and the system that we've created, and how can we shift it to support us? How can we create a business that supports a great life for us, as well as great outcomes for our clients without this burnout? You know, there are self-care things to do, but this is what's going to be a little different about this series, is really in everything we do, actually. Masterclass that's coming up, it's all about that, creating a business that really aligns with the kind of life that is good for you, and that the clients are getting great outcomes and you're energized by that work. You know, just check yourself for a moment. How are you feeling? Even listening to this podcast, do you feel like going in and seeing another client, or you're like, I really wish I could take a vacay to Hawaii because I can't keep doing this work? So look and see where you're feeling energetically, because we've been so busy. Your phone may have been ringing off the hook, or your clients are in so much crisis. There has been time to slow down and connect with yourself and see where you're at. So this is like understanding your red light, yellow light, green light, and knowing where are you and doing things to keep you in that green, that green place.
And, you know, if you're in a system, right? Maybe you're still in an agency system, maybe you are in private practice, wherever you are in your spectrum of private practice. If you're in a system that's not working for you, there is not enough bubble baths in the world, right? There's not enough. You could have a full-time masseuse. And if this system that you've created or that you are working within does not fit you, it will not matter. Your body will keep increasing the symptomology until you hear it.
All those areas, your environment, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all of it is going to get louder and louder.
Yeah. So we hope that you'll join us for the masterclass. Yes. It's going to be really fun. We'll have giveaways. It's going to be rad. Even if you're listening to this later, just check out the free page. We've got other stuff for you. But we'll see you soon, and hope you'll tune in next time. We're going to be delving in deeper into particular areas you can start updating and shifting in your life and in your practice. Until next time.